and from 60 to 70,000 executions, we're down to 383 people died in the Shah's prisons through a combination of torture or suicide or execution.
I said that anything you're going to say, there's going to be naysayers, there's going to be people on either side of this. I can hear a naysayer saying, or how would you respond to a naysayer saying, really, well, how shy and modest can someone be if they're presiding over a police state in Savak? So how do we connect those two dots?
Well, the Shah was also, I think, actually related to shyness and being retired, is that having a retiring nature, is that he did not like to hear bad news. He was someone who, there was an element of self-denial there, and the human rights issue that we're talking about is really focused on the period 1971 to 76, which is, in the book I refer it to as the Iranian as a dirty war against leftist subversion. That's when human rights in Iran became an international scandal. The security officials who worked with the Shah, who knew him well, including General Nasseri, regarded him as so soft that they really created this internal police state that, of course, he was aware that Savak was active and they were suppressing leftists, but they kept the full details of that away from him. I mean, his wife went to him repeatedly saying, this person has been locked up, this artist, this poet, this writer, this is outrageous. But he was not aware of what was happening in the prisons with the torture. I mean, I think that's quite clear to me that was the case. Because when he was informed, starting in early 76, he was the one who invited the International Committee of the Red Cross and Amnesty International and the International Commission of Jurists into Iran to conduct independent investigations. When they came back to him and they said, we have all the numbers of people who are arrested in the prisons, and you really need to focus on this, he did focus on it, and he, starting in early 77, when they released their reports, that's when you see him outlaw torture, and he turns over the prisons to the ICRC, which ironically his enemies, especially in the Islamist movement, saw as a sign of real weakness.
But it's even more than that, as you do in your book. You are a former researcher at Human Rights Watch. I mean, your career would hardly suggest that you're an apologist for human rights abuses.
No.
You claim in this book that you were astounded to find that while the Shah of Iran was no angel when it came to jailing and executing dissidents, as you just talked about, the number of human rights abuses under the Shah were, you say, dramatically lower than what the popular narrative suggests. What can you tell us about that?
The numbers are very important. And for me, because this, what I referred to earlier as a baked-in narrative, as a brutal dictator, the bloody dictator, a bit like Nicholas II of Russia, who was accused of being Nicholas the Bloody, and now we know that he was a very soft, retiring autocrat himself, or like Louis XVI of France. But that these numbers are important because they have been used for a long time to justify the caricature of the Shah as this sort of criminal, as a brutal dictator. We can't really have an honest, full discussion of the period and the man without having the numbers. And now we have the numbers, ironically, courtesy of the Islamic Republic, which did this study probably about 20 years ago now. They decided to memorialize all the victims of the Pahlavi regime. Khomeini, remember, had accused the Shah of complicity in the murders of 60 to 70,000 people, and 100,000 people in lockup, in prisons.
Right.
Those numbers had been repeated by Amnesty International in the mid-1970s. When you look at the numbers we have now, which, by the way, are confirmed by the ICRC, those numbers now have gone down from 100,000 people in prison to, in 1976, 75, 76, it was about 3,200. And from 60 to 70,000 executions, we're down to 383 people died in the Shah's prisons through a combination of torture or suicide or execution. those numbers are important because although there were human rights abuses, I'm not saying that, and it's something I feel very sensitive about because of my background. For historians, it's very important because we need to know what the numbers were so we can have an honest revision of the entire period.